After Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe was put under house arrest by the military, South Africa has sent 2 envoys to Harare to try to help mediate the solution. What is likely to happen now? And as a number of crises have developed across the Middle East, and Saudi Arabia has called for an extraordinary meeting of the Arab League, how are the deteriorating relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia affecting the entire region? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. Following a night of unrest, Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe, who has been in power for 37 years, was put in custody with his family after the military took over the state broadcaster and seized control of the country. The night's action triggered speculation of a military coup, as there had been a prolonged succession crisis after Mugabe fired Vice President Emerson Mnangagwa and wanted to replace him with his wife, Grace. The military claimed it was simply removing criminals around Mugabe, but the former VP has fled and is yet to be found. Now, South Africa has got involved and has sent 2 senior officials as envoys to Zimbabwe to help negotiate with the country's generals, but the situation is still unclear. China has said the friendship between the 2 countries, between China and Zimbabwe, will not be affected. Let's listen to this first.
China has been paying close attention to the situation in Zimbabwe. We sincerely hope that peace and stability can be maintained there. The issues there could be dealt with peacefully and properly. In terms of Chinese investment in Zimbabwe, cooperation between the 2 countries is comprehensive. China's friendly relations and cooperation with Zimbabwe will not change.
To help us understand the situation more, I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Wu Chuanhua, Research Fellow in the Institute of West Asia and Africa Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Ronald Kato, Journalist and Fellow at the China Africa Press Center. Gentlemen, welcome to the studio. Mr. Kato, let me start with you first. There have been speculation that this might have been a military coup, but some other people are using other terms, such as a bloodless correction or a takeover. Exactly what it is?
It bears all the hallmarks of a coup. I mean, how often do you get the military reading news on state TV? How often do you see the military in the streets of the capital? I think the military in Zimbabwe is only avoiding calling it a coup for very strategic reasons, because if you call it a coup, that would actually invite sanctions from the continental body, the African Union, the regional body, the SADC, and also sanctions from the international community. So I don't think we're about to hear the military call it a coup. They'll still continue using such terms as bloodless corruption. We're only targeting criminals, but it bears all the hallmarks of a coup.
Dr. Wu, what is your take on the situation, on the definition of the situation?
Yes, from the very beginning, the military of Zimbabwe denied it was a coup. And the statement of the African Union and the Southern African Development Community, SADC, referred it as political crisis or political impasse, and not the word coup. So this is a very interesting question. Maybe we need to do more research on this issue in future.
And maybe see how the situation develops as well. And at this moment, the situation seems still to be changing, to be fluid. The latest I've heard is that the opposition leader has come back to Harare, and also the position of the youth wing of the ruling party, the ZANU-PF, has also been interesting. It was declaring loyalty to President Mugabe immediately after the military warned about its possible action, and 24 hours later it decided to side with the military. Mr. Kato, what does that say about the situation at this moment?
Well, it tells you one thing. For Mr. Kudza Chipanga, the chairman of the ZANU-PF Youth League, to come out and apologize to the military when, a day earlier he had, made these statements insulting the military, shows you one thing, that he is now convinced, or the youth of ZANU-PF are convinced, that their favorite person, and that's the wife of Mr. Robert Mugabe, Grace Mugabe, will never become president. We should not forget that the people that propped up Grace Mugabe were the youth of the ZANU-PF. they created a group called the G40 or Generation 40, and they were Grace Mugabe's biggest backers. So I think for Mr. Kudzai Chipanga, the chairman of the ZANU-PF Youth League, to take back his words is only an indication that, you know, for Grace Mugabe, you know, any prospects of her becoming president have ended, and the youth have no more business backing her.
Dr. Wu, how do you look at the possible scenarios coming out of the situation right now? As Mr. Kato has indicated, maybe the First Lady has no future anymore, is seen to have very little chance in securing that political position. What is your take on the possible scenarios coming out of it?
Yes, and the future, the situation is not very clear. We will wait and see. But it is commonly expected that President Mugabe will come down. The key question is when and how. Now SADC is concerned very much about the situation. It issued a statement on Zimbabwe political crisis and also sent envoys to Zimbabwe. Now they are working there. I think the stakeholders and the relative parties are working hard, are negotiating to work out a peaceful transition which benefit all sides. That will be the future, the bright future.
However, the crisis seems to have been brewing for quite a while, and Mr. Mugabe has been one of Africa's longest-serving leaders. He was once regarded by many as a hero in fighting colonialism and bringing independence to a black-led state. But now this country's economy, for instance, is in great trouble. And there have been many different criticisms thrown at Mr. Mugabe, including nepotism, corruption, fraud, mismanagement. Mr. Kato, what do you think is the most important factor that led the country to this state at this moment?
Well, I think you could argue that from the early 2000s, it was clear that Zimbabwe was headed for a very difficult situation. The land reforms that President Mugabe introduced, the nationalization of white-owned, farms and factories, spelled a lot of doom for the Zimbabwean economy, and the economic situation began deteriorating at about the same time as the political situation, and that's when sanctions, began to be imposed on not just Mugabe but other senior members of the ZANU-PF. Inflation, at one point reached 500 billion% in 2009. So I think much of the trouble began with the economic reforms that President Mugabe wanted to, or initiated. He wanted to please the black Africans of Zimbabwe, but I think he made so many mistakes in the process.
Dr. Wu, what is your take on the situation?
Yes, just as the statement of ZANU-PF said, there are many political, economic and social crises, if not addressed probably, which will lead to blood conflict. Politically, the internal struggle inside the ruling party ZANU-PF intensified. Economically, the economic situation is really bad. It has been declining in recent years, year by year. We have the GDP growth from the year 2013 to 2016, respectively 4.5%, 3.2%, 1.1%, and 0.6%. So you see the economic situation is very bad. And socially, the people suffer from this political and economic crisis. Yes, they want to see the changes in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because Mugabe is a great admirer of Chairman Mao, right? He visited China a couple of times and always showed his admiration. And China and Zimbabwe had similarities in their starting point, all from very poor and suffered under colonialism. But China embarked on a different growth path. What has been the difference between the two countries' development since the early days? Could the China model been of any value to Zimbabwe's development?
Yes, I think in fact Zimbabwe was once also a socialism country in the world, and it has changed this route since the 1990s. Now China and Zimbabwe have two different routes, and so we can say the democracy doesn't work in Zimbabwe like this situation, because I think it is just
the Western-style democracy.
Yes, yes. I think just maybe democracy is just a game for power. It's a tool for struggle, not for the people, not for the whole country, not for the development of the economy.
Mr. Kato, your take on this?
I think the difference is key. For President Mugabe, I think for him it was to stay on for as long as possible, even after it became clear, even inside the ZANU-PF, that he had lost all the ideals, all the principles they had fought for in the first place. So I think his greed for power, overweighed everything else. I think if he had allowed a transition to take place,
a term,
exactly. If this happened in 2008 or 2007, when they had that very contentious election, things would probably be different today. Because when they had a unity government in 2009,
there wasn't a window of opportunity.
There was a bit of an improvement.
That led to my last question. Dr. Wu, I want to ask you this one. Mugabe is regarded by many in the West as a dictator. How is he seen in his own country?
Yes, we know that President Mugabe is a very, very controversial figure in the world, and even in Zimbabwe, 1,000 people, in eyes of 1,000 people, maybe have 1,000 figures of Mugabe. And we can say that those who love him regard Mugabe as a freedom fighter and a godfather. But those who hate him regard him as a ghost. But it is, one point is clear: Mugabe is an elderly man. He deserves the indignity and respect.
Mr. Kato?
Well,
20 seconds.
Absolutely. On the continent, he's still revered, but I think in Zimbabwe, many will choose to look at him as a liberator, and many will choose to look at him as an oppressor, someone who lost it all.
Thank you very much. We'll keep a close watch on the situation. So, Mr. Ronald Kato, journalist and fellow at the China-Africa Press Center, and Dr. Wu Chuanhua, research fellow in the Institute of West Asia and Africa Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. You have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. I'll be back right after this. Stay with us. China has said it will not change its determination to deepen strategic cooperation with Saudi Arabia, no matter how international and regional situation alters. President Xi Jinping made the remarks Thursday in a phone conversation with Saudi King Salman bin Abdulaziz. This has come as tensions have been escalating in the Middle East after the Saudi royal court complained that Iran has officially crossed a red line. The Arab League is to hold an extraordinary meeting Sunday at the request of Saudi Arabia after Saudi air defenses intercepted a missile near Riyadh, which had been fired from Yemen on November the 4th. In the same week, the Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri resigned unexpectedly after having first fled to Saudi Arabia, where he made his resignation speech. And this too coincides with a purge in Saudi Arabia itself of a number of prominent people, including princes, ministers and top officials, on corruption charges. Are these crises in any way linked? What possible ramifications are we looking at? I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Ali Fatullah Nejad, a visiting fellow from the Brookings Doha Center in Qatar, Nadim Shehadi, director of the Faraz Center for East and Mediterranean Studies at the Fletcher School at Tufts University in Massachusetts, and Dr. Glenn Rangwala, a lecturer in Middle Eastern politics at the University of Cambridge. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Dr. Nejad, what is Saudi Arabia hoping to achieve by calling this extraordinary meeting of the Arab League to discuss Iran's so-called violations?
I'm not sure if I got your question right,
yes,
because the volume is too low.
Yeah, what is Saudi Arabia trying to achieve by
and
calling...
I'm also hearing myself.
Do you manage to hear me at all?
Yes, I do.
Okay, my question is, what is Saudi Arabia trying to achieve by calling this extraordinary meeting of the Arab League?
Well, obviously Saudi Arabia is trying to, fortify a kind of an anti-Iran front within the Arab League. But the Arab world is also not united in any case, as we can see from the Qatar crisis. So this should be the aim of sending a message, at least from that body, out.
Mr. Shihadi, in Yemen, the Saudi-led military coalition fighting Houthi forces said Monday it would begin reopening airports and seaports in Yemen. It's days after closing them after a missile was intercepted near Riyadh. Now, Saudi Arabia accuses Iran of being behind the firing of the missile. What could have been the intention of the Houthi forces to fire a missile near Riyadh?
Thank you. Well, I'm not sure what their intention is, but the effect is very clear that it was almost like the straw that broke the camel's back. And this may be a positive development because it's mobilizing both regional and international forces to try and control a possible regional war that could erupt in the whole region. I mean, there is a serious build-up of tension between not just Iran and Saudi Arabia, but in the whole region, and there is a need now with President Trump in China, with meetings with the Russians, to try and control the situation.
Dr. Rangwala, let me ask you about the situation in Lebanon. Harari's abrupt resignation has prompted a lot of discussion and a crisis actually in that country. How does the Lebanese crisis fit into the larger picture here?
Well, Saudi Arabia is enmeshed in three crises simultaneously. There is the diplomatic crisis with Qatar, there is the military and humanitarian crisis, which is severe in Yemen, and there is the political crisis in Lebanon. All come, in my understanding, from a newly assertive Saudi foreign policy. Saudi Arabia has been trying to take on a much more prominent and public role in foreign affairs. Historically, it has been part of a coalition. Now it is trying to lead that coalition, and that's the context within which the calling of the meeting today, I think, should be understood. It is trying to rally a group of states under its leadership to deal with what it perceives to be hostile acts around the Middle East that are seen to challenge its power within the region. So in Lebanon, it's the development of the Hezbollah coalition within the Lebanese government, which has taken a significant role for the past year, since October 2016, in orienting that government on lines that are not necessarily threatening to Saudi Arabia, but bringing it into alliance with Iran. Similarly, in Yemen, the Houthi movement has long had ties, not necessarily military ties, but at least political ties with the Iranian government. And Qatar is seen by many in Saudi Arabia not to be a loyal member of the coalition. And so the punishment of Qatar that has occurred over the past few months in terms of the blockade of that country, I think should also be seen in the light of the way in which Saudi Arabia is now trying to position itself as a leading state within the region.
Mr. Shihadi, what is your reaction to what Dr. Rangwala has been saying about Saudi Arabia trying to lead the bloc from within? What could possibly be the reaction of other countries in the region to that posturing?
Well, I mean, there was a mention that the Arab world is divided. I think unity in such situation is a bit overrated. The Arab world is in crisis because of Iran's actions in the region. It is it's a regional issue. It's not purely a Saudi issue. The Saudis are trying to rally international and local support to confront this before it gets out of hand. The Iranians are involved in Palestine, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Bahrain, in Kuwait, and possibly in as far away as Bulgaria in a couple of years ago. So if this situation, if it continues, will not just threaten the region, it will threaten the regimes themselves, who are expected to protect the population. We are in a situation where you have 6 major cities that have been destroyed in the region, with millions of refugees, hundreds of thousands of casualties, and in a situation like this, people expect a leadership to protect them. Otherwise, the worst can happen, as we've seen in other defeats in the region. So we are, in my view, facing a situation of defeat and of Iranian victory in a way in the region. The Iranians are pushing their luck too far. They're not being gracious in victory. They are rubbing it in people's noses. And
I understood your point.
What we're seeing is a reaction. Yeah.
I understand. Dr. Rangwala, do you agree with what Mr. Shihadi had been saying?
I don't think I do. Iranian policy has not changed in the last few years. The role of Hezbollah in the Syrian conflict has diminished. It's become less visible over the last year than it was at its height in 2014. The Iranian involvement in the Yemeni conflict is marginal to the Yemeni conflict. It's a sideshow. It's not what's driving the conflict in Yemen at the moment. In Iraq, Iran had a significant role in defeating the so-called Islamic State movement, but now that battle has been won, essentially it's handed power back to the Iraqi government in those regions it helped reoccupy. So I think the Iranian role has diminished over the past year. It's not become more prominent. The change instead is within Saudi politics, with the ascension of the new Crown Prince, who is trying to put his mark on the region in a way that I think often speaks to a lack of caution than an established political approach within Saudi Arabia. I think we have to see this in the context of Saudi changing policy.
Yeah, let's look at the situation inside Saudi Arabia. I was going to talk about that. I mean, on Saturday, 11 Saudi princes were arrested, and the move is widely seen as a way for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to eliminate rivals and consolidate his power. So how much is that movement likely to further exacerbate the political tensions already brewing in the region, Mr. Shihadi?
I think we may be seeing 2 different processes which are not in a way related. There is a crackdown in the kingdom on corruption, which started 2 years ago with investigation, and at the same time there is basically a renewed foreign policy of confrontation, which says enough is enough. So what they did was recall Prime Minister Hariri and in a way convince him to resign because Prime Minister Hariri had been seen to be too compromising in Lebanon, and Hezbollah has been overstepping its power in Lebanon and renewing relations with the regime in Damascus on an official level on behalf of a government that he himself is heading. So in a way, if he had stayed in government, he would have been lending legitimacy to Hezbollah actions. And I don't believe that Hezbollah's actions or Iran's actions have diminished. What's happened is that they've destroyed the region, they've taken over, and something has, the Saudis feel that something has to be done about it.
I understood your point.
Otherwise,
Dr. Rangwala, I got your point, Mr. Shihadi.
Yeah.
Dr. Rangwala, what is your position on the question I mentioned about is there any connection between the mass arrests in Saudi Arabia with the tension we're seeing in the region?
I think there is. In Saudi Arabia, policy has always been made since the 1950s by a coalition of princes, a fairly loosely organized coalition, which has acted usually in concert with each other, but not in an especially unified way. What we're seeing over the last 2 years in Saudi Arabia is the consolidation of the government around one group, very tightly woven group of individuals, headed by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And in that respect, it unites foreign policy, defence policy. He's also Minister of Defence, the anti-corruption drive within the country, which he again heads, and international economic policy. He's the chair of the Economic Council as well. So through that new constellation of power within Saudi Arabia, we see the uniting of defence, economic and military power within the same hands. And that to me speaks to a situation where we can't but see these things as connected in watching the evolving Middle East.
I see. Very briefly to both of you, basically 10 seconds each, what has been the possible impact of President Trump's position on both Saudi Arabia and Iran on the situation? Mr. Shehadi, you first.
Sorry, what is the possibility of what?
The possible impact of President Trump's position
Can you repeat the question?
On both Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Well, I mean, President Trump has been, in a way, also leading a confrontation with Iran, and this is a radical change from the policy of the Obama administration, and I think it's a good thing for, with respect to the U.S.'s allies in the region, which include the GCC countries, including Qatar, by the way, and Israel, of course. So I think it is reassuring after we've seen what they see, what the allies of the United States see as a disastrous policy from the Obama administration vis-à-vis Iran.
Dr. Rangwala, your take?
My sense is it's one of the most enduring crises in world politics, with the potential for very drastic consequences for the region. The decertification of the Iran nuclear deal, the confrontation with Iran over Iraq and over Yemen and over Lebanon, all speaks to the way in which the United States is being drawn in unintentionally into a potential conflict with Iran that will have very grave consequences for the region as a whole.
Thank you very much to both gentlemen, Dr. Glenn Rangwala at the University of Cambridge and Mr. Nadim Shehadi from Tufts University in Massachusetts. It's been a very interesting situation, and we'll keep a close watch at the developments. And that is it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Follow me with the handle The Point with Alex. Thanks for watching. We've got The Point.